My life is still good. After my internship in hell, I decided to leave the guard when my time was up. Even though I left, the guys and I are still friends. Mary understands everything and wouldn't want it any other way. In fact, I have become the official and unofficial photographer for the unit. I mostly take a few training shots for them, and once a year, I photograph the entire group in formation. They pay me with their friendship, and occasionally, some of them come to help me with firewood on their own time. Of course, they also get free firewood. After a while, my partner in the photography business decided it was time to cut back and enjoy life more. The business is steadily gaining momentum, and some time ago, we had to take on another intern. She is learning the same way, mastering one business and then moving on to another. Martha has been working independently for 3 months now and is thriving. Most of our work is now digital, but we still use film when the job requires it. There are 2.5 of us now, and it sure is nice to have a female perspective on some things. I was coming back from an assignment and walked into a little diner on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. I had been there many years ago, back before hell. The food was good then, and it was good now too. There were several people there, but one couple stood out. You could tell by the way they talked and looked at each other that they were in love. She was a redhead with bright green eyes and a gorgeous body. Her face was a little boyish, which made her even more intriguing. He was tall, swarthy, and handsome. Plus, he was black. Not that it bothered me. I thought it made them much more interesting. I'd heard enough of their conversation to know that they were articulate and engaging. We left at the same time, and as we walked outside, I noted how good they looked together. She was blushing. I couldn't tell if he was. We talked a bit about how many people are negative about their relationship. I asked them, "Do you love each other?" Of course, I could already see the answer in their eyes. They answered yes at the same time in perfect harmony. I told them that if they were sincere, the opinion of others didn't matter. As we parted, he noticed me heading toward my company car with the logo on the side. We talked for a few more minutes about my work. He said he could send me some pieces, and I gave him a business card. A few months later, I showed up for a meeting with a potential client. In the lobby, they had reviewed the materials on our company's website and were happy to talk to me. The firm they were working with was slower than they liked, and the work was sloppy, which they didn't like either. I asked how they had heard about us, and the president pulled out a slightly battered business card. "My son-in-law gave it to me," he said. "He and my daughter were very impressed with you personally, and if the website is to be believed, your company must take pride in quality work." I am almost never at a loss for words, but here, I was confused. He saw the look on my face and called someone into his office. I heard footsteps behind me. "I want to introduce you to my daughter, Catherine," he said. I turned and saw the most stunning green eyes. Now I knew why the photo seemed so familiar. Their faces could have been twins, save for the age difference and the red mustache. I also noticed a small baby bump. My mom always told me that a gentleman never mentions pregnancy first in conversation. I smiled and shook her hand. "Diner," I said. She smiled. I left with a 3-month contract so we could see how the companies work together, with an option to extend for 3 years if things went well. As we shook hands, Catherine handed me a piece of paper with a phone number on it. "Please call this number," was all she said. I didn't know what to think, but life was good and getting better. I wasn't sure my partner would agree, though. He might have to work full-time until we could train someone new. An hour later, back home, I called the number. I left my name and phone number and went straight to voicemail. 3 days later, I picked up the phone. "Hi, it's Mark," was the first thing I heard. My first thought was, "I'm so happy for you," but instead, I asked, "How can I help you?" He explained that he was Catherine's husband and, after a brief hesitation, asked if I would take some intimate photos of him and his wife. I explained that I was an industrial photographer, rarely shot people, and had never done anything like this. "I know someone who can do it," I told him, "and I can give you his number." He explained that he and Catherine were comfortable with me and would appreciate it if I agreed. He also expressed concern that the pictures might fall into someone else's hands if too many people were involved. He couldn't bear the thought of Catherine being dishonored that way. I told him I'd think about it for a few days and call him either way. The next evening, Mary and I talked about it. I had taken some modest pictures of her when she was pregnant with Billy. Mary was proud of them and thought I should take the job. She pointed out that women become even more beautiful during pregnancy and should have a reminder of those times. Who could argue with that logic? The next day I called Mark back and we talked. I told him the work would be private. The company couldn't be involved. If he wanted candid photos, I wouldn't take them. The only option for photography would be digital. I would give him a memory card, and he would handle the printing himself. I would need a modest photo or two to share with Mary. He could set the price, knowing what we normally charged for work. Since I had never done this type of work before, I wouldn't accept payment until they were completely satisfied. He was pleased with the offer and said they would discuss everything. The next day, Catherine called and agreed to the terms. Neither of them had ever posed for a photography session like this before, and both had their doubts. I offered to send Mary's favorite picture for their approval, explaining that she was quite modest and that I had her permission to do so. I told Catherine that we would need to set a time and place and work out a plan before anything could happen. On the appointed day, I arrived at their house, which was beautiful but too large for my taste. We talked and agreed to start the session outside in the garden, fully dressed. They had outfits they wanted to try, and I thought Catherine in black and Mark in white would create an interesting contrast. For the first set, they wore vintage evening attire, Catherine in a dress and Mark in a tuxedo. Next, Catherine wore a flowing peasant dress, and Mark opted for casual clothes, both barefoot for a more natural look. Later, we returned to the black and white theme, again maintaining a relaxed, artistic feel. They looked great together and individually, and their ease in front of the camera made for strong compositions. After about 3 hours, we moved inside for some additional portraits in their home. By this point, we had built trust and they felt more comfortable. They were still dressed in black and white, so we continued with that theme, capturing elegant and intimate moments in a tasteful and artistic manner. The session emphasized expression, connection, and composition. Once we wrapped up, they changed back into their regular clothes while I packed up my equipment. We returned to the living room, where I handed them the memory cards containing the photos. Mark showed me a new professional-grade printer they had recently purchased, an upgraded version of the one we used at the store. I liked its additional features and decided to purchase one for myself. 3 weeks later, I received a large envelope in the mail containing 4 printed photos and a check for $5,000 more than I had expected. 3 of the images were taken outdoors, each featuring a different outfit. The final photo captured a beautifully composed moment, Catherine reclining against Mark in a relaxed, serene pose. The joy on their faces was undeniable. The letter enclosed with the package expressed their satisfaction with the results. They had printed nearly all the images, keeping only a handful aside. Out of over 900 photos, they discarded just 5 or 6. No one achieves perfection, but I had promised them they would be happy with the results, and they were. They mentioned that the final photo had been enlarged to 11 by 14 inches, framed, and hung in their bedroom as a meaningful keepsake. Wanting to share the experience, I showed the photos to Mary, who had known Catherine from college. They had taken some classes together, and Mary called Catherine the next day. "We'll meet for dinner next month." Catherine seemed to recognize Mary too, but didn't want to say anything that might cause awkwardness during the shoot. One day, we had a visitor at work, a Marine Corps combat photographer. He told our receptionist that he was looking for the Red Baron. She thought he was crazy and told him that you could buy that brand of pizza at the local market. Few people know about this part of my life beyond what is known about my exploits. My partner heard him and asked him to wait a minute. He then called me and informed me of the visitor. I met up with Steve about an hour later. Turned out he had been with me that day in hell. He had several pictures of the scene from that day. I looked at one of the explosion flashes and several others that captured the fight. They were all top quality. He had a flash drive with all the pictures he had taken that day, and he wanted to give it to me. I had seen enough and politely declined. When I asked him if he was still in the Marines, he said he had seen enough and had recently been discharged. I asked what he was doing and where he was going, but he didn't know. I told him about our company and asked if he would be interested in working with us. After talking for a bit, he decided he would be. I called my partner and set up a meeting. Great minds think alike, I was told. At the store, he showed some photos, and my partner was impressed with their quality too. To take as many frames and shoot as many photos as he did, while getting good work every time, is almost impossible. He did the impossible. We agreed on a 6-month trial period. If things didn't work out or if he wanted to leave, we could remain friends. He gave the flash drive to my partner in case I changed my mind. I don't think I'll change my mind, but you never know. 2 days later, he brought the rest of his portfolio. I think he was better than me. There were photos from sporting events, portraits, landscapes, and a few industrial shots like the ones we do. The one I remember most was a photograph taken at a racetrack. It was of a race car, shot with a wide-angle lens from ground level and viewed from above. The tires were not touching the ground. He said he quit the business after seeing this picture because the car was going 150 miles per hour and made a sharp turn about 40 feet before him. His mom raised big kids, not dumb ones. Starting next week, we had 4 working photographers for the next 3 months. We didn't need to bring him up to speed slowly, as we had done before, but he needed to understand the requirements of our contracts and learn how we wanted the work done. Upon reflection, we realized he had it all worked out. After lunch, back home, I realized that Mary had a lot on her mind. I let her think about what was bothering her. Eventually, she told me that she wasn't happy with the way her life had turned out. "No," she said, "that's not what I meant." She felt lost and kept watching what was going on. She loved me very much, and that would never change. But she didn't know who she was or what she wanted. She felt like she needed to be alone to think about it. She had never had time to be alone with herself. By then, it began to seem to her that her life was a series of events flowing one into the other for no particular reason. First, she was her parents' child. Then she went to college, got an internship and a job, got engaged and married, went through hell and rehab, and then became the mother of the most wonderful little girl in the world. She was happy with everything that had happened, but she needed to stop and take a look at her life, decide what she wanted, and then she could move on. She felt like she knew the answers to everything, but the future scared her. We talked for hours. She had no one else and was madly, passionately in love with me. I was the perfect husband and had done nothing for it. She had a small furnished apartment within walking distance of her work and thought she would be fine there. She wanted me to leave Billy and stay at home to limit outside influences. If there was an emergency, I could call her at work anytime. During everything she said, I was mostly silent. She had taken time to think about how she wanted to present her case. I asked for time to think about everything she had said. We didn't talk much at dinner, and after I put Billy to bed, I took the time to tell her about my concerns. I loved her more than life, and I told her so. But in order for her to have the time she asked for, we both had to be faithful to each other. There should be no dating anyone else and certainly no sex. I felt that if we had sex during this, it might confuse her or affect her, so the decision had to be entirely up to her. We were well known in the neighborhood, and if either of us cheated, it would surely become known to others. I thought it would be nice if we got together for a date every now and then to discuss anything that might be important before we parted. She had to let me know how much time she might need, and I asked her to think about it for a few more days before she decided to act. Now, I had a headache almost as bad as my heart for the first time in our marriage. I turned around and went to bed without kissing her goodnight. I hardly slept that night, and I don't think she did either. She didn't come to bed, and when I looked in on her at 3 a.m., she was still sitting in the same spot, tears streaming down her face. As I lay in bed, I reflected on our life, wondering how this had happened. Maybe I hadn't been attentive enough, crowding her or spending too much time taking care of her, and she had been honest about not having anyone else. Now, I was starting to doubt myself and everything I knew and believed in. Worst of all, I didn't know if I could trust her. Had she really killed him? 5 days later, after much arguing, tears, and frustration, we were still no closer to resolving that question. We were both mentally exhausted, physically drained, and extremely unhappy. In short, our lives were getting bad very quickly. Billy began to notice that things weren't right and started asking questions. Why are Mom and Dad unhappy? Do we love her? How can she make us feel better? Did she do something wrong? Did someone get sick? No little girl should have to worry about such things. And if Mary left, things might get even worse. Eventually, we sat down with Billy and told her that we loved her and each other very much. But Mommy was confused, and we would be spending time apart. Mom could pick her up from nursery and sometimes leave her overnight, but she would be with me most of the time. We assured her that the problem was not her fault. Billy tried to find a way to keep Mommy home, then ran out of the room in tears. Mary looked like she wanted to die. Billy cried herself to sleep, and I held her hand and tried to comfort her. Later, in the small bedroom, I cried myself to sleep too. That night, Mary packed her things, tried to sleep on the couch, and left in the morning for work and another life. I took the day off. Billy was convinced that Mom didn't love her enough. There was nothing I could do or say to convince her otherwise. In the evening, Mary called to make sure we were okay. She wanted to talk to Billy, but Billy replied that her mom had left, and she didn't want to talk to anyone on the phone. Mary heard her and sobbed for a while before hanging up. There was no way I could blame Billy for being angry and feeling abandoned. I tried to call Mary back, but her phone was off. I left her a message telling her that we both loved her and would miss her. I hoped she would make up her mind sooner rather than later, and be happy in the end. After that night, I continued to sleep in the small bedroom for the whole of the next week. I was worse than useless. Eventually, everyone at work advised me to go home until I felt better. The next day, we packed food and clothes into the car and drove to Mom and Dad's house. I wanted to borrow their camper, to get away, relax, and try to have some fun. While we were there, Mom and Billy talked for a long time over cookies and ice cream about how much Mary loved all of us and how hard it was for her when I wasn't home. We hadn't told Billy about my time in hell yet. We thought she was too young to understand. Then Mom pulled out some pictures of what I looked like before it all happened. Billy's eyes widened. She was surprised to learn that her daddy was a hero, and even more surprised that I looked so different. Mom showed her a picture of me at the age she was now, and Billy thought I looked just like her, only without the hair. Then Mom showed her a picture of me all bandaged up, and a picture the doctors had sent of me before the surgeries. I don't know how, but her eyes got even wider. She ran up to me, hugged me, and said that she loved her mom and me very much, that she was glad I was beautiful again, that I was a hero, and please don't die. I hugged her and said I knew she loved her mom, and that there was no way I was going to die. Hopefully not for a long time to come. I think every father is a hero in his child's eyes. As we drove to the lake, we talked. At the lake, we talked even more. For 5 days, we swam, fished, and hiked all over the neighborhood. On the second day, Billy said she needed to talk to her mom. We discussed what she wanted to say when we called, and that Mom was at work, so her phone would be disconnected. There was no phone signal at the lake, so we hiked to the top of a small mountain nearby. Once we were there, Billy was able to tell her everything she wanted to. She told her where we were, that she was the best mommy ever, that she missed her and was happy, that I was a hero and wouldn't die for a long time. Then she hung up. I told Mary that there was no reception at the lake and that I missed her too. That night was the best night ever. We caught a few trout for dinner, sang songs, and told stories until we were too tired to keep going. We slept soundly, and in the morning, Billy talked me into going up the mountain again. We ate breakfast, packed a lunch, and hit the trail. We walked slower that day, taking frequent breaks, talking about the trees, flowers, birds, and animals. I pointed out how beautiful the views would be from the top. Before we got there, I told her that Mom probably hadn't turned her phone on last night. I never go anywhere without my camera in the car, so I brought it along. As we walked and talked, we decided to take pictures. I showed Billy how to hold the camera, frame a shot, and press the shutter. She took a few on her own. She did pretty well. At the top, we had lunch and took more pictures. Then I pulled out my phone and let Billy take one to send to Mom. I was about to turn it off when it beeped. There was a message. It was from Mary. I played it. She thanked us for calling and said she was glad we loved her, and even more glad that I wasn't going to die anytime soon. She had gone to the doctor, who had run some tests and believed she had depression. When the results came in, she would let us know. I let Billy listen. Just as I turned the phone off, it beeped again. Another message. Thanks for sending the picture. Billy was happy. So was I. We started down the mountain in the evening. For dinner, we had canned beef stew. No way to camp without it. I let Billy open the can and heat it up on our little stove, supervising her closely. It was the best meal I've ever had. After we ate, we plugged my laptop into the car and went through our photos. By the time we were done, we were exhausted. We cleaned up and went to bed. The next day was rainy and cool. We read stories, played games, and decided to drive into town for lunch. There, I spotted some teddy bears and bought two, one small, with a red ribbon, for Billy, and one bigger with a blue ribbon, for Mary. That night, Billy slept with both of them. Our vacation ended the next day. We were both sad to leave. I promised Billy that one day we would come back with Mom. We would all climb to the top of our mountain together. As we drove home, Billy asked how soon Mommy would be coming back. Unfortunately, I didn't have an answer. While we were gone, Mary had been by the house. She took more clothes, left her test results, and placed the framed picture we had sent her on the dresser. Billy asked to hang the picture where she could see it from her bed. The test results, along with the doctor's written explanation, confirmed that Mary had a slight chemical imbalance. With the right medication, she would get better, and eventually she'd be able to stop taking it. The doctor suspected her condition was linked to past experiences, though he didn't go into detail. Mary also left us notes. In Billy's, she wrote that she was the most wonderful daughter in the world and that she missed her terribly. She wanted to pick her up after kindergarten one day soon and keep her overnight. In mine, she said she was feeling much better, that she missed me most of all, that she wanted to meet for lunch next Tuesday at a nearby restaurant. She gave a time and asked that I only call if I couldn't make it. We could discuss when Billy could stay with her. I would have crawled back through hell to make that appointment. On Monday, I took Billy to daycare and returned to work. Everyone was glad to have me back. I printed pictures from our trip, made a disc with all of them for Mary, and arranged a slideshow with a special note at the end from Billy. Tuesday morning, I packed a bag for Billy, including her bear, and wrapped Mary's bear as a gift. I also placed Mary's photo disc in an envelope. Work didn't go as planned, and I was told to leave early to make my date. I drove slowly, lost in thought, lost in worry about how it would go and what we would talk about. I arrived half an hour early and waited in the parking lot. Mary arrived 15 minutes early but didn't notice my car. She went inside, getting ready for our date. She was so beautiful. When I reached her table, she stood up and gave me the best hug in the world. Then we sat. I was more nervous than hungry. She looked like she wanted to say something, like she couldn't wait to say it. We ordered, and then she started. She regretted the time we had spent apart. Now, she understood how hard it had been to live with her. She nearly cried when she told me how much she missed us. She had to stop several times just to keep from breaking down. She was thankful for the messages on her phone. She saved them and listened to them every night before bed. She loved the picture Billy had taken and even printed a copy to hang above her desk. She cried when I told her Billy had taken it just for her. The doctor was sure he understood her condition. She felt better than she had in a long time. But there had to be a but, didn't there? She was afraid to come back. Not because she wasn't sure about us, but because when she was in the house she had that feeling that someone was watching her. It bothered her. She reminded me of the time Billy Howard had stayed with her while I was recovering. How could I forget? I told her we could move if that would make her feel better. She didn't like the idea, but she didn't say no either. We talked for 2 hours about everything. As we were getting ready to leave, I told her I had something for her in my car. She looked uncertain, but I assured her it was good stuff. On the way, I asked when she wanted Billy to come over. "The sooner, the better," she said. I handed her a bag. Inside were Billy's clothes. She gave me a funny look. "How about tonight and tomorrow?" I asked. She hugged me so tightly I nearly turned blue. I took that as a yes. Then she pulled out an envelope. She knew all the good stuff was inside. And she was right. She flipped through the pictures. "These are beautiful," she said. Then I told her who had taken them. And when she cried again, I told her what was on the disc. She didn't stop for a long time. Yet, she asked about the picture of Billy sleeping with the 2 bear cubs. I told her about that rainy day, about our trip to town, and how Billy insisted on sleeping with both cubs that night. Then I held out the present to her. She squealed when she saw what it was. I got another one of the world's best hugs before she let go of me. I kissed her on the cheek. Then, I pulled out my cell phone and called the nursery to let them know that Billy's mom would be picking her up the next 2 nights and dropping her off in the mornings. I asked them not to tell her that I wasn't going to pick her up. As she headed to her car, Mary turned around, smiled, and told me I had been rude. She asked me to call her when I wanted to meet up. I still slept in the small bedroom that night. When I got to work on Wednesday, Steve told me he was glad everything went well yesterday. I guess I really did look happy. I had done a lot of work to make up for the previous day. In fact, I had worked so much that there was nothing left to do, so I went home early. My lot is surrounded on 3 sides by public roads. The only boundary is a large creek. As I was driving down the road behind the house, I saw a car parked off to the side of the road, and I thought someone was trying to hide it. I turned around and drove back. As I passed by, I memorized the license plate number. I called the sheriff and asked him to check it out. He was nearby and said he'd be on it in about 5 minutes. I turned around again and drove home. Pulling up to the house, I parked in front of the open garage. As usual, something was wrong. Stripey had gotten out of his pen and was running back and forth on the porch. I called the sheriff, who was just about to inspect the car I'd found. He turned and headed toward the house. I approached the porch from the side where I knew I couldn't be seen. Stripey was having fun with the guy who had crawled under my porch. Every time he tried to move, Stripey lunged at him. If the guy wasn't a fool, he'd be all right. The sheriff arrived immediately. I wasn't worried about him because he and Stripey were real friends. He had been called in often while I was in hell. When he was ready, I called Stripey into her pen, scratched her behind the ears, and praised her for a job well done. The guy crawled out from under the porch with his hands held high. The sheriff cuffed him and sat him down on the steps. When the sheriff and I got a good look at him, we started laughing. The man was filthy, covered in dirt and cobwebs, with scratches all over his body and a bite on one of his pants legs below the knee. That's when I remembered that I hadn't put Stripey in the pen that morning. She had been in the house. I went around the house and found the back door open and the window in it broken. Stripey had done a good job. When I got back to the house, the sheriff already knew the guy's name. His car was parked behind my house. I asked him if he had tried to enter my house. He didn't have to answer. I could read his face. A tow truck was called to pick up his car. The state police sent him to the crime lab, and a sheriff's deputy took him to a cell and questioned him. I later learned that he had taken a class with Mary. He was truly in love with her, but by then, she was already in love with me and didn't have time for anyone else. He started to come around after he saw her picture in the paper. When I was injured, he wanted her back, but he never got her. I never wanted to be a hero. That night, Mary let Billy call me to say goodnight. Billy was thrilled to be with her mom. She must have thanked me 100 times the night before. They fell asleep early in each other's arms. I asked Mary to call back after she put Billy to bed. I had news to share. Mary called back about an hour later. Exactly how long it took her to put Billy to bed. I told her about the guy and all the excitement. She didn't even recognize the name. 2 weeks later, we went out to dinner, and Mary said she wanted to come home for the weekend to see how she was doing. That weekend, we both put Billy to bed. Mary no longer felt like she was being watched. She insisted we sleep together in our bedroom. 3 days later, we were a family again. The next time I saw Steve at work, He told me that Mary had been completely faithful while we were apart. His court buddy worked in the same office as Mary and had a friend who lived across the hall from her apartment. Mary only went to work, to the doctor's office, and to see me. I still don't know if I want to kick Steve or hug him. When Mary's stalker appeared in court, she was able to discern who he was. He seemed vaguely familiar, but nothing more. Mary told the court that we would accept the trespassing charge if he went far away and never came back. He apologized for his actions and said he had a job offer from a company on the West Coast but needed a clean criminal record. He was fined $600. He and his new wife send us Christmas cards through the court. In my first month of kindergarten, Billy brought me to show and tell. She told me I was a hero. I still don't feel like a hero. All I wanted to do was live. We love each other more than ever, and we don't take that for granted. Once a month we have a date night. Sometimes Billy joins us, but not too often. Next year, we'll go to the lake and all go up the mountain together. 9 months after Mary's return, Billy became a big sister. The boy went blind by age 3. Billy constantly takes pictures of him with the camera she was given for Christmas. We named our boy after my father and Mary's father. His name is James James. James James James. Guess which one of them was the first to be honored?